In the mist-shrouded hills of Central Europe, archaeologists carefully brush away millennia of accumulated earth from a bronze cauldron that has lain buried since before the time of Christ. Its intricate Celtic knotwork still visible beneath the patina of age, while nearby, the skeletal remains of a warrior lie surrounded by iron swords, golden torques, and amber beads that speak of trade networks stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Mediterranean, representing just one small piece of the vast puzzle that is Celtic civilization. A culture that once dominated much of Europe from Ireland in the west to Turkey in the east, from Scotland in the north to Spain in the south, yet remained largely mysterious, until modern archaeology began to piece together their remarkable story. Through painstaking excavation and analysis of their material culture, the Celts emerged from the Proto-Indo-European migrations that swept across Europe during the Bronze Age, developing their distinctive culture in the region that is now Austria, Switzerland, and southern Germany around 1200 BCE, during what archaeologists term the Late Bronze Age, though their true florescence would not occur until the Hallstatt period beginning around 800 BCE, named after the famous archaeological site in Austria, where thousands of graves have revealed the wealth and sophistication of early Celtic society. The Hallstatt culture, characterized by distinctive burial practices, ironworking technology, and elaborate artistic styles, represents the first clearly identifiable Celtic archaeological horizon, with its influence spreading across vast territories as Celtic-speaking peoples migrated, traded, and established settlements throughout much of Europe. Archaeological evidence from sites like Hallstatt itself, with its salt mines that provided the economic foundation for Celtic prosperity, reveals a society already stratified into clear social classes, with wealthy elites buried with elaborate grave goods including imported Mediterranean pottery, Etruscan bronzes, and locally produced items of extraordinary craftsmanship, while commoners were interred with simpler assemblages that nonetheless demonstrate widespread access to iron tools and weapons that revolutionized both agriculture and warfare. The material culture of the Hallstatt Celts shows clear influences from Mediterranean civilizations, particularly the Greeks and Etruscans, with whom they maintained extensive trade relationships, exchanging raw materials like tin, copper, salt, and amber for luxury goods, wine, and manufactured items, creating cultural exchange networks that would profoundly influence Celtic development and spread Greek artistic motifs and technological innovations throughout Celtic territories. DNA analysis of remains from Hallstatt cemeteries has revealed a population that was ethnically diverse, suggesting that Celtic identity was more cultural and linguistic than strictly biological, with various indigenous European populations being absorbed into Celtic society through processes of acculturation and intermarriage. While isotope studies of teeth and bones indicate that many individuals buried in Celtic territories had grown up elsewhere, confirming the high degree of mobility that characterized early Celtic society. The transition from the Hallstatt to the Latine period around 450 BCE marks a crucial transformation in Celtic culture, named after the archaeological site at Lake Neuchâtel in Switzerland, where ritual deposits of weapons and other objects were discovered in the 19th century, revealing an artistic style that would become synonymous with Celtic civilization and continue to influence European art for over 2 millennia. The Latine style, characterized by flowing curves, spirals, and stylized animal forms, represents a synthesis of Mediterranean influences with indigenous European traditions, creating an aesthetic that was uniquely Celtic and would spread across their territories as the culture expanded and evolved, appearing on everything from weapons and jewelry to pottery and architectural elements. Archaeological excavations at major Latine sites like Manching in Germany, Bibracte in France, and Maiden Castle in England have revealed the existence of large fortified settlements, known as abita, which served as centers of political power, craft production, and trade, some housing populations of several thousand people and covering areas of hundreds of hectares. demonstrating the organizational capabilities and urban planning skills of Celtic societies. During their classical period, the Latine Celts developed sophisticated metalworking techniques, producing iron weapons and tools of exceptional quality, as well as elaborate bronze and gold jewelry that showcased their artistic skills and served as markers of social status, with techniques like repousse, engraving, and filigree work reaching levels of sophistication that rivaled contemporary Mediterranean civilizations. Celtic craftsmen also excelled in other areas of material culture, producing distinctive pottery styles, textiles woven from wool and linen, leather goods, and wooden objects that have occasionally been preserved in waterlogged conditions, providing insights into the full range of their technological capabilities and daily life practices. The social organization of Celtic society, as revealed through archaeological evidence and later historical sources, was fundamentally hierarchical, with a warrior aristocracy at the top, supported by a complex system of clientage and obligation that bound together different levels of society, from the highest nobles and their warrior bands down to farmers, craftsmen, and slaves, creating a social structure that was both flexible enough to accommodate newcomers and rigid enough to maintain clear distinctions of rank and privilege. At the apex of Celtic society stood the warrior elite, individuals who demonstrated their status through elaborate burials containing weapons, armor, jewelry, and other luxury goods, often accompanied by chariots or horses that symbolized their martial prowess and social position, while their residences, typically located on helforts or other defensive positions, were larger and more elaborate than those of commoners, featuring imported goods and architectural elements that demonstrated their wealth and connections to wider trade networks. The archaeological record reveals that Celtic elites were buried with sets of weapons that included long iron swords, spears, shields, and sometimes helmets, indicating a warrior culture that valued martial skill and personal combat, while the presence of drinking vessels, cauldrons, and other feast-related objects suggests that hospitality and display of wealth through feasting played important roles in maintaining and demonstrating social status. Celtic warrior culture was closely tied to concepts of honor, courage, and personal reputation, with archaeological evidence suggesting that individual combat and cattle raiding were important means of gaining prestige, while the deposition of weapons in rivers, lakes, and other sacred places indicates that martial activities had important ritual and religious dimensions that connected warfare to the supernatural world. The middle ranks of Celtic society included skilled craftsmen, traders, and free farmers who owned their own land and could afford iron tools, weapons, and modest luxury goods, as demonstrated by burial assemblages that, while less elaborate than those of the elite, still contain significant quantities of material goods and indicate participation in regional trade networks and cultural practices. Archaeological evidence from settlement sites shows that these middle-ranking Celts lived in substantial houses, often constructed of timber and thatch, with evidence of specialized craft production including metalworking, pottery making, textile production, and other activities that contributed to the economic foundation of Celtic society. While their burial goods often include sets of personal ornaments, tools, and weapons that reflect both their economic status and their participation in wider Celtic cultural traditions. At the bottom of Celtic social hierarchy were slaves, prisoners of war, and others who lacked personal freedom, whose archaeological traces are more difficult to identify, but who undoubtedly played important roles in Celtic economic systems, particularly in agricultural production, mining, and other labor-intensive activities. Though the material record suggests that even slaves and dependents had access to basic iron tools and participated in some aspects of Celtic material culture, the flexibility of Celtic social organization is demonstrated by evidence that individuals could change their status through military service, craft specialization, or other means, while the incorporation of foreign elements into Celtic society through marriage, adoption, or voluntary association created a dynamic social system that could adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining its essential character and cultural identity. Women in Celtic society appear to have enjoyed relatively high status compared to their counterparts in some contemporary civilizations, with archaeological evidence revealing female burials containing weapons, luxury goods, and other indicators of high rank, suggesting that some women served as warriors, rulers, or religious specialists, while DNA and isotope analysis indicates that marriage patterns often involve the movement of women between communities, creating kinship networks that help bind together different Celtic groups and facilitate political alliances. The presence of elaborate female burials at sites like Vix in France, where a Celtic princess was interred with a massive bronze crater from Greece, and other extraordinary grave goods, demonstrates that women could achieve positions of considerable power and wealth in Celtic society, while later historical sources confirm that female rulers, warriors, and druids played important roles in Celtic political and religious life. Throughout the classical period, Celtic religious beliefs and practices, as reconstructed through archaeological evidence, iconography, and later historical accounts, centered around a complex polytheistic system that emphasized the sacredness of natural features, like springs, groves, rivers, and mountains, with ritual activities often taking place in these natural sanctuaries, rather than in constructed temples. Though some Celtic societies did build elaborate religious structures including wooden temples, stone circles, and ritual enclosures that served as focal points for community worship and ceremony. Archaeological excavations at sites like Gournay-sur-Erin in France have revealed Celtic sanctuaries containing thousands of weapons, tools, and other objects that were ritually deposited over centuries, indicating that the offering of material goods to the gods was a central feature of Celtic religious practice, while the careful arrangement and treatment of these deposits suggests sophisticated ritual protocols and priestly oversight that governed religious activities. The Celtic pantheon included hundreds of deities, many of whom were associated with specific geographical features, tribal groups, or aspects of human activity, with major gods like La, associated with skill and craftsmanship, Brigid, goddess of poetry and smithcraft, and Cernunnos, the horned god of nature and fertility, appearing in various forms across Celtic territories. While local deities and spirits were equally important in daily religious life, and often incorporated into the worship of major gods through syncretistic practices, Celtic iconography, preserved on coins, metalwork, stone carvings, and other artifacts, reveals a rich symbolic vocabulary that included spirals, triskelies, animals like boars, ravens, and stags, and anthropomorphic figures that represented various aspects of the divine, while the recurring motifs of heads, both human and animal, reflect the Celtic belief in the head as the seat of the soul and the focus of spiritual power. Ritual deposits in water bodies represent one of the most distinctive aspects of Celtic religious practice, with thousands of weapons, jewelry, cauldrons, and other objects being deliberately placed in rivers, lakes, springs, and bogs across Celtic territories, creating archaeological assemblages that demonstrate both the wealth of Celtic society and the importance of water in their religious cosmology. The famous Gundestrup cauldron, discovered in a Danish bog but created by Celtic craftsmen, depicts complex religious scenes including processions of warriors, ritual sacrifices, and images of deities that provide invaluable insights into Celtic mythology and religious practices. While its discovery location, far from Celtic heartlands, demonstrates the wide distribution of Celtic religious objects and the influence of Celtic culture across Europe. Human sacrifice, while controversial and often exaggerated by Roman sources, does appear to have been practiced by some Celtic groups under specific ritual circumstances, as evidenced by bog bodies like Lindo Man and archaeological contexts that suggest ritual killing, though the extent and frequency of such practices remains debated among scholars, with many arguing that Roman accounts were deliberately sensationalized to justify conquest and cultural suppression. The Druids, Celtic priests, and religious specialists served as intermediaries between the human and divine worlds, conducting ceremonies, maintaining oral traditions, and serving as judges, teachers, and advisors to rulers, with their training requiring decades of study and memorization of complex legal, historical, and religious knowledge that was transmitted entirely through oral tradition, rather than written records. Archaeological evidence for Druidic activity is necessarily indirect, consisting of ritual sites, religious iconography, and material culture associated with religious practices. Those sites like Anglesey in Wales, described by Roman sources as a major Druidic center, have yielded significant quantities of ritual metalwork and other religious deposits that confirm the importance of Druids in Celtic society. Celtic festivals and seasonal celebrations, reconstructed through later folklore and historical sources, were closely tied to agricultural cycles and astronomical observations, with major celebrations at Samhain, Halloween, and Bolt Candlemas, Beltane, May Day, and Lughnasadh Lammas marking important transitions in the Celtic year, and providing occasions for community gathering, ritual activity, and cultural reinforcement. The treatment of the dead in Celtic society varied considerably across time and space, with cremation and inhumation both being practiced, often within the same communities, while grave goods ranging from simple personal ornaments to elaborate assemblages of weapons, jewelry, vehicles, and imported luxuries reflect both social status and religious beliefs about the afterlife and the continuity of identity beyond death. The economic foundation of Celtic society rested on a combination of agriculture, animal husbandry, craft production, and trade that created prosperity sufficient to support large populations, elaborate material culture, and complex social hierarchies, with archaeological evidence from settlement sites revealing sophisticated systems of land use, resource management, and technological innovation that enabled Celtic communities to thrive in diverse environmental conditions across Europe. Celtic agriculture was based primarily on the cultivation of wheat, barley, oats, and other grains, supplemented by legumes, vegetables, and fruits, with iron tools including plowshares, sickles, and other implements enabling more efficient cultivation of both light and heavy soils than had been possible with bronze implements, while the development of rotational cropping systems and the use of fertilizers helped maintain soil fertility and increase yields. Archaeological excavations at sites like Danebury Hillfort in England have revealed extensive storage facilities including granaries, underground pits, and other structures designed to preserve grain surpluses, indicating that Celtic communities were capable of producing and storing food supplies sufficient to support non-agricultural specialists and to weather periodic crop failures or other disruptions to food production. Animal husbandry played an equally important role in Celtic economy, with cattle, pigs, sheep, and goats providing meat, milk, hides, wool, and other products essential to daily life, while horses served as both status symbols and practical tools for transportation, warfare, and agricultural work, with breeding programs that produced animals specifically adapted to local conditions and intended uses. The importance of cattle in Celtic society extended beyond mere economic utility to encompass social and symbolic dimensions, with cattle serving as measures of wealth, mediums of exchange, and objects of competitive display among the elite. While cattle raiding appears to have been both an economic activity and a form of ritualized warfare that served to redistribute resources and demonstrate martial prowess, Celtic craft production reached remarkable levels of sophistication, with specialists in metalworking, pottery, textiles, woodworking, leather goods, and other trades creating products that were both functional and aesthetically pleasing, often incorporating complex decorative schemes and technical innovations that required years of training and experience to master. Iron production was particularly important to Celtic economy, with sites like Manching in Germany revealing industrial-scale manufacturing operations that produced tools, weapons, and other iron goods not only for local use but for export to distant markets. While the control of iron ore deposits and the technical knowledge required for smelting and forging created important sources of wealth and political power for Celtic communities. Celtic metalworkers also excelled in the production of bronze and precious metal objects, creating elaborate cauldrons, mirrors, jewelry, and other luxury goods that demonstrated both their technical skills and their artistic sensibilities, with techniques like lost wax casting, repousse work, and intricate engraving being used to create objects of extraordinary beauty and complexity. Trade networks connecting Celtic territories with the Mediterranean world, Scandinavia, the Baltic region, and other distant areas created flows of raw materials, finished goods, and cultural influences that enriched Celtic society and enabled the acquisition of exotic materials and luxury items that served as markers of status and wealth. While Celtic merchants and traders became influential figures in the economic and political life of their communities, archaeological evidence from Oppida and other major Celtic settlements reveals the existence of designated market areas, standardized weights and measures, and even early forms of coinage that facilitated commercial transactions and enabled the development of increasingly sophisticated economic relationships, both within Celtic society and with neighboring cultures. Salt production, particularly important at sites like Halstead, provided both a vital preservative for food storage and a valuable trade commodity that could be exchanged for other goods across vast distances. While the control of salt sources created opportunities for wealth accumulation and political influence that shaped the development of Celtic society from its earliest phases, mining operations for copper, tin, gold, silver, iron, and other metals were conducted on an industrial scale by Celtic communities, with sites like the copper mines at Great Orme and Wales, revealing sophisticated extraction techniques, extensive underground workings, and evidence of organized labor forces that could undertake major engineering projects and produce substantial quantities of raw materials for both local use and long-distance trade. The integration of these various economic activities into coherent systems of production, distribution, and consumption required sophisticated organizational capabilities and created opportunities for specialization, innovation, and wealth accumulation that supported the complex social hierarchies and elaborate material culture that characterized Celtic civilization at its height. Celtic military organization and warfare technologies evolved significantly over the centuries of their expansion and development, transforming from the relatively simple warrior bands of the Halstead period into the sophisticated military systems that could challenge Roman legions and establish Celtic dominance over vast territories across Europe, with archaeological evidence revealing continuous innovation in weapons, tactics, defensive fortifications, and military organization that reflected both indigenous Celtic traditions and influences absorbed from contact with other military cultures. The foundation of Celtic military power rested on the individual warrior and his personal equipment, which typically included a long iron sword designed for slashing attacks, one or more spears for both throwing and thrusting, a shield constructed of wood and leather with metal reinforcements, and sometimes additional weapons like daggers, axes, or slings. While elite warriors might also possess helmets, mail armor, and other protective equipment that enhanced their effectiveness in combat and served as markers of their high status within the warrior hierarchy. Archaeological analysis of Celtic weapons reveals continuous technological development and regional variation, with smiths experimenting with different blade designs, handle configurations, and metallurgical techniques to produce weapons that were not only effective in combat, but also aesthetically pleasing and symbolically meaningful, as demonstrated by elaborate decorative schemes, ritual deposits of weapons in sacred places, and the inclusion of weapons in high-status burials. The Celtic long sword, or spatha, represented a significant advance over earlier Bronze Age weapons, with its extended reach, superior metallurgy, and effectiveness against both armored and unarmored opponents, making it the preferred weapon of Celtic warriors throughout much of their history, while variations in blade length, cross-section, and hilt design reflect regional preferences, chronological development, and individual status within the military hierarchy. Celtic shields, reconstructed from archaeological remains and historical descriptions, were typically constructed around wooden frameworks covered with leather, and reinforced with metal bosses, rims, and decorative elements, with sizes and shapes varying according to regional traditions and tactical requirements. Though most appear to have been designed for aggressive, offensive combat rather than purely defensive use, spears played crucial roles in Celtic warfare, serving as both throwing weapons and thrusting implements, with archaeological evidence revealing a wide variety of spear types, designed for different tactical situations, from light javelins suitable for skirmishing to heavy thrusting spears intended for close combat. While the ritual deposition of spears in water bodies and their inclusion in burial assemblages demonstrates their symbolic importance in Celtic warrior culture, the development of Celtic fortifications, from simple hilfers to elaborate oppida with multiple defensive lines, demonstrate sophisticated understanding of military engineering and the ability to organize large labor forces for construction projects that could span decades and involve the movement of enormous quantities of earth and stone. Archaeological excavations at sites like Maiden Castle in England and Bibracte in France have revealed complex defensive systems including multiple ramparts, ditches, gates with intricate entrance passages designed to channel and trap attackers, an internal organization that could accommodate large populations during times of siege. While the scale and sophistication of these fortifications indicates both the resources available to Celtic communities and the military threats they faced, Celtic warriors were organized into warband structures based on personal loyalty to individual leaders, with young men seeking to attach themselves to successful war chiefs who could provide opportunities for glory, wealth, and advancement, while the chiefs competed with each other for followers by demonstrating their ability to lead successful raids, distribute captured wealth, and protect their dependents from external threats. The role of chariots in Celtic warfare evolved over time, with early Celtic warriors using chariots as mobile platforms for reaching the battlefield and displaying their status, before dismounting to fight on foot, though in some regions, particularly Britain and Ireland, chariot warfare continued to play important tactical roles even after it had been abandoned elsewhere in favor of cavalry and infantry formations. Celtic cavalry, developed during the later Latine period, incorporated influences from contact with Germanic and other neighboring peoples, with Celtic horsemen serving as scouts, raiders, and mobile strike forces that could exploit tactical opportunities and pursue defeated enemies, while the breeding and training of war horses became specialized activities that contributed to both military effectiveness and social prestige. The tactical flexibility of Celtic military organization, based on relatively small, mobile units led by experienced warriors, enabled rapid concentration of forces for major campaigns, while maintaining the ability to disperse quickly to avoid defeat or pursue multiple objectives simultaneously. Though this flexibility sometimes came at the cost of strategic coherence and unified command, that might have enabled more effective resistance to Roman conquest. Celtic warfare was characterized by emphasis on individual combat, personal honor, and the display of martial prowess, with warriors often challenging enemies to single combat, taking heads as trophies, and engaging in various forms of psychological warfare designed to intimidate opponents and demonstrate their own courage and skill. while the integration of ritual elements into military activities connected warfare to religious beliefs and cosmic order. The artistic achievements of Celtic civilization represent one of their most enduring and influential legacies, with their distinctive decorative style, known as Latin art, continuing to inspire artists, designers, and craftsmen more than 2 millennia after its initial development. While archaeological discoveries continue to reveal new examples of Celtic artistic sophistication and technical mastery that challenge earlier assumptions about the capabilities and cultural achievements of prehistoric European societies, Celtic art emerged from a synthesis of indigenous European traditions, with influences absorbed through contact with Mediterranean civilizations, particularly Greek and Etruscan artistic styles and motifs, creating a unique aesthetic that combined naturalistic representation with abstract geometric patterns and stylized forms that reflected Celtic worldview and religious beliefs. The development of Celtic art can be traced through several distinct phases, beginning with the early Latin style around 450 BCE, which featured flowing curves, spirals, and stylized plant motifs derived from Mediterranean palmette and lotus designs, evolving through Middle Latin phases that increasingly emphasized abstract geometric patterns and symbolic representations, and culminating in late Latin styles that achieve remarkable sophistication and their integration of multiple decorative elements into unified compositions. Archaeological analysis of Celtic artistic production reveals the existence of specialized workshops and master craftsmen who maintain high standards of technical excellence while developing regional variations and individual styles, with objects like the Gundestrup cauldron, the Battersea shield, and the mirrors from various English sites demonstrating levels of artistic achievement that rivaled contemporary Mediterranean production. Celtic metalworkers employed a wide range of decorative techniques including engraving, repousse work, chasing, inlay, filigree, granulation, and enamel work, creating objects that combine functional utility with aesthetic beauty and symbolic meaning, while their mastery of complex metallurgical processes enabled the production of elaborate multi-part compositions that require precise planning and execution. The iconography of Celtic art draws heavily on natural forms, with animals, plants, and human figures being stylized and transformed into decorative elements that carried symbolic and religious meanings, while recurring motifs like the triskel, spiral, and knotwork patterns reflect fundamental aspects of Celtic cosmology and religious belief systems. Animal representations in Celtic art often focus on creatures that held special significance in Celtic religion and mythology, including boars, ravens, stags, horses, and aquatic birds, with these animals being depicted both naturalistically and in highly stylized forms that emphasize their symbolic rather than descriptive qualities, while the frequent appearance of fantastic hybrid creatures reflects Celtic beliefs about the supernatural world and the transformation of beings between different states of existence. Human representation in Celtic art tends towards stylization and symbolic abstraction, rather than realistic portraiture, with heads being particularly important as seats of spiritual power and wisdom, while full human figures often appear in ritual or mythological contexts that emphasize their roles in religious narratives rather than their individual characteristics. The technical sophistication of Celtic enamel work, particularly the champ technique where colored glass was melted into recessed areas of bronze objects, represents a major technological achievement that require precise control of temperatures, timing, and chemical compositions, while the range of colors achieved and the complexity of designs created demonstrate both technical mastery and artistic sensibility. Celtic stone carving, while less well preserved than metalwork, reveals similar artistic principles and decorative schemes applied to architectural elements, memorial stones, and religious monuments, with sites like the pillar stones of Ireland and the carved stones of Scotland demonstrating the continuation of Latin artistic traditions into the early medieval period. The influence of Celtic artistic styles extended far beyond the boundaries of Celtic political control, with Celtic decorative motifs appearing in Germanic, Thracian, and other artistic traditions. While the revival of interest in Celtic art during the medieval period and again in modern times demonstrates the enduring appeal and cultural significance of Celtic artistic achievements. Textile production, though rarely preserved archaeologically, appears to have been another area of Celtic artistic excellence, with historical sources describing elaborate woven and embroidered fabrics, while the few preserved examples reveal sophisticated dyeing techniques and complex pattern structures that complement the decorative schemes found in metalwork and other surviving media. The integration of artistic elements into everyday objects demonstrates that Celtic aesthetic sensibilities were not limited to luxury goods or religious contexts, but permeated all aspects of material culture, with even simple tools, weapons, and household items often featuring decorative elements that transformed functional objects into expressions of cultural identity and artistic achievement. Celtic expansion and migration patterns across Europe during the first millennium BCE created one of the most extensive cultural diffusion processes in prehistoric European history, with Celtic-speaking peoples establishing settlements, founding cities, serving as mercenaries, and creating political entities from Ireland in the west to central Turkey in the east, while maintaining sufficient cultural coherence to be recognizable as a distinct civilization. Despite considerable regional variation and adaptation to local conditions, the earliest phase of Celtic expansion during the Hallstatt period involved relatively gradual population movements and cultural diffusion that spread Celtic influence throughout Central Europe, with archaeological evidence suggesting that Celtic culture was adopted by many indigenous groups through processes of acculturation rather than wholesale population replacement, creating a pattern of cultural expansion that would characterize Celtic spread. Throughout their history, the major Celtic migrations of the Latine period, beginning around 400 BCE, involved more dramatic population movements that brought Celtic peoples into direct contact with Mediterranean civilizations, established Celtic settlements in northern Italy, the Balkans, and Asia Minor, and created political and military pressures that would eventually contribute to the Roman conquest of Gaul and other Celtic territories. Archaeological evidence from sites like Montmassois in France and the Huenberg in Germany reveals that Celtic expansion was facilitated by the development of oppida, large fortified settlements that served as centers of political power, craft production, and trade, enabling Celtic communities to organize resources, coordinate activities, and project power over surrounding territories, while maintaining connections with distant Celtic communities. The Celtic invasion of Italy around 390 BCE, which resulted in the sack of Rome and the establishment of Celtic settlements in the Po Valley, demonstrates both the military capabilities of Celtic peoples and their willingness to undertake long-distance migrations in search of new territories and opportunities, while the subsequent development of Cisalpine Gaul as a major Celtic region shows their ability to adapt to new environmental conditions and integrate with existing populations. Celtic migrations into the Balkans and Asia Minor during the 3rd century BCE resulted in the establishment of the Galatian state in central Turkey, providing evidence of Celtic ability to maintain their cultural identity and political organization even when separated from their homeland by vast distances and surrounded by peoples of different linguistic and cultural backgrounds. The settlement of the British Isles by Celtic peoples represents a particularly significant aspect of Celtic expansion, with archaeological evidence suggesting multiple waves of migration and cultural influence that brought Latine artistic styles, ironworking technology, and probably Celtic languages to Britain and Ireland, where they would continue to develop and flourish long after Celtic culture had been suppressed on the European continent. DNA analysis of ancient and modern European populations has provided new insights into Celtic migration patterns, suggesting that Celtic expansion involved complex processes of population movement, intermarriage, and cultural adoption rather than simple conquest and replacement, with genetic evidence indicating considerable continuity between pre-Celtic and Celtic populations in many regions. The role of trade networks in facilitating Celtic expansion cannot be underestimated, with Celtic merchants, craftsmen, and warriors following established routes that connected Atlantic Europe with the Mediterranean and Black Sea regions, creating opportunities for cultural exchange, economic development, and political alliance that supported the growth and spread of Celtic civilization. Celtic expansion also involves significant interactions with other European peoples, including Germans, Thracians, Illyrians, and various Mediterranean cultures, resulting in cultural exchange, military conflict, political alliance, and intermarriage that created complex patterns of cultural hybridization and adaptation across European frontiers. The establishment of Celtic communities in diverse environmental conditions, from the Atlantic coastlands of Ireland and Scotland to the mountains of the Alps and the steppes of Eastern Europe, demonstrates remarkable adaptability and cultural resilience, with Celtic peoples developing regional specializations and adaptive strategies, while maintaining cultural traditions and linguistic connections. Military service as mercenaries provided another avenue for Celtic expansion and cultural influence, with Celtic warriors serving in Greek armies, Roman forces, and various Mediterranean conflicts, gaining military experience, accumulating wealth, and establishing connections that could facilitate further migration and settlement. The gradual nature of Celtic expansion in many regions, involving centuries of cultural contact and gradual assimilation rather than sudden conquest, helps explain the remarkable geographic extent of Celtic culture and the persistence of Celtic traditions in many areas. Long after the loss of political independence, the decline of Celtic political power did not immediately end Celtic expansion, with continued migration, cultural influence, and linguistic spread occurring throughout the Roman period and beyond, particularly in areas like Ireland and Scotland that remained outside direct Roman control and continued to develop distinctively Celtic cultural traditions. The decline and transformation of Celtic civilization represents a complex historical process that unfolded over several centuries and involved multiple factors including Roman conquest, internal conflicts, economic changes, and cultural assimilation, with different regions experiencing this transformation at different times and in different ways. Though the overall result was the gradual incorporation of most Celtic territories into Roman or Germanic political systems and the suppression or transformation of traditional Celtic culture. The Roman conquest of Gaul between 58 and 50 BCE, led by Julius Caesar and documented in his commentaries on the Gallic Wars, represents the most dramatic and well-documented phase of Celtic decline, with Caesar's detailed accounts providing valuable insights into Celtic society, politics, and military organization while also revealing the strategies and tactics used by Romans to divide, conquer, and pacify Celtic peoples. Caesar's conquest succeeded partly because of divisions within Celtic society, with different tribes and factions aligning themselves with Rome in hopes of gaining advantage over their rivals, while the Romans skillfully exploited these divisions through diplomacy, bribery, and military intervention that prevented unified Celtic resistance and enabled piecemeal conquest of Gallic territories. The defeat of Vercingetorix at Alatia in 52 BCE marked the effective end of independent Gallic resistance to Roman rule, though sporadic rebellions continued for decades, and complete Romanization took generations to accomplish, with many aspects of Celtic culture persisting under Roman rule and influencing the development of Romano-Celtic hybrid cultures. The Roman conquest of Britain, beginning with Caesar's invasions in 55 and 54 BCE and culminating in the Claudian conquest, after 43 CE, followed similar patterns of exploiting tribal divisions, establishing client rulers, and gradually extending direct Roman control. Though significant areas of Britain remained outside Roman rule and continued to develop independent Celtic cultures, the revolt of Boudica in 60 to 61 CE demonstrates both the persistence of Celtic resistance to Roman rule and the ultimate futility of such resistance against Roman military organization and resources. While her defeat marked the end of major Celtic resistance in southern and central Britain, though Celtic culture continued to flourish in Wales, Scotland, and Ireland, archaeological evidence from the Roman conquest period reveals significant changes in material culture, settlement patterns, and economic systems as Celtic communities adapted to Roman rule, with traditional oppida being abandoned or transformed, Roman-style towns and villas being established, and Celtic artistic traditions being modified to incorporate Roman influences and serve Roman markets. The process of Romanization varied considerably across different regions and social groups, with Celtic elites often adopting Roman customs, education, and political participation as means of maintaining their status and influence under the new regime, while common people might retain traditional practices and beliefs, while adapting to Roman legal systems and economic structures. Celtic languages continued to be spoken throughout the Roman period in many areas, though Latin gradually became dominant in urban areas and among educated classes. While Celtic religious beliefs and practices were often syncretized with Roman gods and rituals, rather than being completely suppressed, the decline of the Roman Empire in the 4th and 5th century CE created opportunities for Celtic cultural revival in some areas, particularly in Ireland and Scotland, which had never been under Roman rule, and in Western Britain and Brittany, where Celtic languages and cultures experienced a renaissance that would continue into the medieval period. The Anglo-Saxon invasions of Britain during the 5th and 6th centuries CE created new pressures on Romano-British populations, with many Celtic-speaking Britons migrating to Wales, Cornwall, and Brittany, where they maintained their linguistic and cultural traditions while adapting to new political and economic circumstances. The survival of Celtic culture in Ireland, which was never conquered by Romans and experienced only limited Anglo-Saxon influence, provided a crucial reservoir of Celtic tradition that would influence the development of Christianity in Celtic areas and contribute to the preservation and transmission of Celtic languages, literature, and artistic traditions. The conversion of Celtic peoples to Christianity, beginning in the late Roman period and accelerating during the early medieval period, transformed Celtic culture while also providing new contexts for the expression of Celtic artistic and intellectual traditions, with Celtic monasteries becoming centers of learning and artistic production that preserved and transmitted classical knowledge while developing distinctive Celtic Christian traditions. The development of Celtic Christianity, with its emphasis on monasticism, learning, and artistic achievement, represents one of the most successful adaptations of Celtic culture to changing historical circumstances, enabling Celtic communities to maintain their distinctive identity while participating in broader European cultural and religious developments. Archaeological rediscovery of Celtic civilization began during the 18th and 19th centuries, as European scholars and antiquarians became increasingly interested in their prehistoric heritage, with early excavations at sites like Hallstatt in Austria providing the first systematic evidence for the sophistication and extent of Celtic culture, while the development of scientific archaeology in the 20th century has continued to reveal new aspects of Celtic life and to challenge earlier assumptions about prehistoric European capabilities. The discovery of the Hallstatt Cemetery in 1846 by Georg Ramsauer marked a crucial turning point in understanding Celtic prehistory, with systematic excavation of over 1,000 graves revealing the wealth, artistic sophistication, and international connections of early Celtic society. while subsequent excavations at Lawtane and other key sites established the chronological framework and cultural characteristics that continue to define Celtic archaeology. Early archaeological interpretations of Celtic culture were heavily influenced by classical sources and contemporary nationalist ideologies, with 19th century scholars often emphasizing the warrior aspects of Celtic society, while minimizing evidence for their technological achievements, urban development, and cultural sophistication. Biases that have only gradually been corrected through more systematic and objective archaeological investigation. The development of scientific dating techniques, particularly radiocarbon dating, has enabled much more precise chronologies for Celtic sites and has revealed the true antiquity and duration of Celtic cultural development, while dendrochronology has provided extremely precise dates for wooden structures and artifacts that have revolutionized understanding of Celtic settlement patterns and cultural change. Aerial photography and remote sensing technologies have revealed the existence of thousands of previously unknown Celtic sites across Europe, including settlement sites, field systems, roads, and religious monuments, demonstrating that Celtic settlement was much more extensive and organized than previously suspected, and providing new insights into Celtic land use and territorial organization. Modern excavation techniques and interdisciplinary approaches have revealed new aspects of Celtic daily life, including evidence for diet, health, agricultural practices, craft production, and social organization that provides a more complete and balanced picture of Celtic society than was available from earlier archaeological work or classical historical sources. The discovery and excavation of waterlogged sites like Flag Fen in England and various lake villages in Switzerland and France have provided exceptionally well